Every week I find myself looking for new snack recipes. As soon as I find a really good one, after a couple weeks, my kids tend to get a little sick of it or fed up with it, so I need to constantly switch it up. And I wanted to share some recipes that have been recent hits in my household. When on the hunt for a new snack recipe, there is certain criteria that is absolutely important. I want it to be nourishing and healthy and use simple ingredients. I want it to be quick to make, something that I'm not going to have to spend all day in the kitchen working for, because the reality is that I'm a busy mom and I just don't have that much free time. And finally, I want it to taste good, because the worst is making a new recipe or a snack recipe and then having it just sit in the pantry or in the fridge and, collect dust pretty much, because the kids don't want to eat it since they don't like it. This first recipe that I'm making here is one of my favorites because it is such a high protein recipe. Two of my kids love this recipe, my eldest and my son. It has simple ingredients and is made up almost entirely of boiled eggs. So what you see me doing here is I am peeling a lot of eggs. I tend to make a double batch, so I made 12 hard-boiled eggs here. The trick to peeling hard-boiled eggs, really just boil them hard. Don't turn down the water. Boil them. I usually boil them for between 10 and 12 minutes. I put the eggs in when the water's cold, and then I just let it come up to temperature. And then I transfer it into the sink and I empty out the hot water, replace it with cold water. I do that a couple times. I know some people add ice, but ice is limited in this household, so I don't want to kind of waste my ice on that. But as long as you switch up the temperature quick from hot to cold, the eggshells should peel fairly easily. The next steps are easy. You put it in a blender with some cocoa powder and maple syrup. That way it's free of refined sugars. And add some milk to it and blend it all up until smooth. Initially, when you do blend this, it will smell a little eggy, so don't let that put you off. But after it's ready, transfer it to a bowl and put it in the fridge. After it sits in the fridge to chill, the egg smell will completely go away and you'll be left with this really silky, smooth tasting chocolate pudding. My son, this is one of his favorite desserts. Initially, with a single recipe, it called for both a third a cup cocoa powder and a third a cup maple syrup. Now, I make a double recipe, and I've slowly been reducing the amount of sugar, so the amount of syrup. So I actually put a third a cup for a double recipe. Now, the blender, of course, has buttons, so that attracts everyone's attention, and my son wants to go and click all the buttons. I usually let him start it or stop it. He's growing impatient here because he really wants to try the chocolate pudding. He's always trying to stick his fingers in the bowl and get a little taste. I gave him the spatula afterwards to lick, and he was happy with that. With the first snack complete, let's move on to making just a quick applesauce. So I often will take about half the bag of apples that I buy and turn it into applesauce. I like having applesauce readily available, first because the baby just loves applesauce, but also I use it to sweeten a lot of other foods, especially yogurt. My kids love what they call a dessert breakfast, which is when I give them yogurt with applesauce and even the chocolate pudding that I just made. And I know that they're getting a good amount of protein. They'll be, well nourished and full for the start of the day at least. And it's also something that they really enjoy eating. I will also use applesauce to sweeten muffins or to put on top of pancakes, just a variety of different uses. And it's so simple to make. I just chop up the apples, I throw them in a pot. I usually add some cinnamon and maybe a little bit of salt. And then I just mush it up and it is ready once it's cooled to be transferred into a container and put in the fridge. If you want your applesauce to be completely smooth, you can use an immersion blender or, pass it through a regular blender. But I personally like finding those little chunks of apples hidden within. Once again, my son is by my side, hoping to get a taste. He thoroughly enjoys snack making days. Snack number 3 that I'm getting started on here are some homemade granola bars. So I'm using, this is a 8x8 inch pan. And I'm just going to line it with parchment paper. If you crumple up the parchment paper, it's easier to have it stay in the pan. I'm just going to put about 2 cups of oats in a bowl. This recipe is super versatile. You can really add whatever you want to this granola. I add raisins and chocolate chips often, sometimes dried cranberries, various nuts. But, with kids, they tend to pick out the nuts a lot of the times. I use honey as a binding agent just to get them nice and firm. But I also tend to leave them in the freezer because we like them nice and chilled. For some added protein, I'm putting in some hemp hearts here. So I do this just, to bulk them up and make them a bit more filling. My kids can't even tell the difference of when I add the hemp hearts and when I don't. I tend to make granola bars for my middle daughter since she does not like the pudding. I want her to have some sort of, little treat that she enjoys eating and a snack when the others are eating the pudding. But in reality, all my kids love these granola bars, so they tend to go very quick in this household. I want to talk a bit about the expectations that I have when it comes to making food from scratch. Although I have the skills to make a lot of my food from scratch, I have realized that I need to give myself a bit more grace and not, hold myself up to such a high standard where I feel it necessary to make absolutely everything from scratch. As my kids are getting older and as I kept having more kids, it became more of a challenge. And I'd really beat myself up sometimes thinking like, oh, I, should have gone the extra length and made sure that all the food was prepared with, no refined sugars or, that I didn't buy any sort of things from the grocery store that had preservatives that I didn't agree with or like. But the reality is it's a bit of a trade-off. I don't want to sacrifice a lot of my free time that I have with my kids where I could be just, enjoying their presence and live in the moment by feeling like I need to constantly, grind in the kitchen and whip up all these homemade meals. Some days I do resort to buying, snacks from the grocery store. We buy crackers, we buy yogurt from the grocery store. I try to supplement with my own homemade foods, and I also try to be selective with what I choose off the shelves of the grocery store. I think this is probably one area that is, something that I weighs heavily on me because I want to provide the best for my family. But I also know by providing the best, I can't always keep myself busy in the kitchen. I need to be present with my kids. I think this struggle is true for many moms. We just put such high expectations on ourselves and want to provide as much as we can for our kids. But the reality is as long as we're trying our best, that should be good enough. I hope. But, only time will tell. I'm really looking forward to some warmer weather where we can go eat fresh berries and, fresh peas and things from the garden as snacks. So that way it's not such of a stressor that I put on myself and so much extra work during like I do in the winter months. Here I'm just finishing up packing in the granola. So I just try to press it as much as I can into the pan. You want to make sure that there's not many air pockets. That way it'll firm up nicely and it won't just crumble when you go to cut it. The last thing I do is I add a layer of peanut butter on top, just a nice salty treat. And then I go and put it in the freezer. The next day I'll take it out once it's fully chilled and I will cut it into pieces. I do little bite-sized pieces just because I have little kids and, a bite-sized piece is plenty for them. But if you prefer bigger chunks, that is fine. I actually went and cut these even smaller after I recorded this. Let me know if you try a different variation or, add different things in and how they turn out. Now that we finished the granola bars, let's move on to another item that is not a snack in itself, but granola, it makes, certain things a lot more enjoyable. My kids love having granola on yogurt, and so do I. It's probably my kind of dessert of choice. If I don't have something sweet in the house, I'll have some yogurt with granola on top and sometimes some maple syrup or pudding or applesauce, whatever I have available. So I really like to whip up just like a quick granola, and I don't like to add too many things into it because I can always add them afterwards. And depending on what I'm using the granola for, I may not want things like nuts or dried fruit or, whatever it is. I like to just wing it a lot of times with my granola. I'm looking for a certain moisture level. So what I find most important is adding enough oil. Sometimes I'll use lard as well, depending on which olive oil I have readily available. If it's too high a quality and I don't have, like a cheaper olive oil, then I'll resort to lard. I want to make sure that all the granola is fully coated. Again, I add hemp hearts just like I did to the granola bars. I just think it makes it more nutrient dense. So I add all these ingredients to a bowl. I added some molasses. I find that adds a lot of like flavor, and I also find it makes a lot more clusters. Those little crunchy chunks that all stick together and get a little caramelized with sugar. Those are my favorite parts, and the molasses really help with it. So once I've mixed it all together in this large bowl, I will then spread it out onto a baking sheet. So I do put quite a lot on one baking sheet. I just try to maximize the quantity that I can put. But this will mean that it's going to take a lot longer in the oven, but that doesn't really bother me. I'm in the kitchen for the duration of the day and I just sort of flip it or move it around every 10 to 15 minutes. I'm putting a layer or just like a drizzle of maple syrup on top because, again, I think that adds to the clusters as well. It gets like certain pieces to stick together. When I go and I flip the granola or, I move it all around after 10 minutes, I'll add another layer of maple syrup. Once the granola is fully dried out, I will transfer it to some mason jars and put some lids on them, and it'll be ready to store in my pantry, and we'll go through it and use it over the next couple of weeks. Making your own granola is also a great way to save money. It is so much cheaper to make it at home than it is to buy from a store. I hope you enjoy my snack recipes. Let me know what you think of them or if you have any add-ins you think I should try.